Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Soul Sessions with Creative Mind. And we are continuing our series on personalities.
Yeah, our continuing series on personalities. And today we're going to talk about what everyone has to face at one point in their life, dealing with difficult people.
I never have to deal with difficult We all do. And we're going to talk about personality disorders. And
in particular, one, the Narcissistic Personality Disorder.
Yeah, a lot of people talk about the how to deal with their narcissist ex or their mother or father, or a lot of talk in the ethers of the internet on how to deal with these kind of people. And we're going to talk about how we can approach it in maybe a different way, so everyone can be happy.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but...
Well, we could be empowered to deal with, like, how to have more power.
I'm just joking. I'm yanking your chain.
So let's start with, when we talk about difficult people, usually when someone is, and we're talking about, like, over-the-top difficult, like not a normal, she's selfish, or this person's just kind of dramatic sometimes. We're talking about people that you really feel that no matter what you do, you can't win. And that feeling of frustration, would you describe that as a way of kind of that extreme where there's no rational way you can work with some people?
Yeah.
Where they feel like it's just like out of the blue or irrational.
Yeah, so let me just preface this by saying let's say when you want to know about personality disorders, there's a lot of information you can get on the internet. Certainly look for DSM-5 categories, or look for university centers that are presenting information on personality disorders, or clinical psychologists, psychiatrists that are online speaking about those things. Mm-hmm. So you get good information.
Instead of just someone saying, I had an experience with a narcissist and let me tell you what that is, and they're really not experts in it. Maybe they're experts in having a relationship with one, but might not be how to really, from a deeper level of psychology, understanding the psyche in that way.
Yeah, and so our contribution is essentially to look at this phenomena that's called personality disorders from a different perspective. Certainly from a coaching perspective, from a positive psychology perspective, but also from a spiritual perspective, which is often lacking in those conversations about how to deal with difficult people.
We just want to get them out of our life and shut them out, put them in a box or a jail somewhere and not have to deal with them.
Yeah.
So when you say these kind of disorders, let's talk about the biology of it. Like what's going on genetically, physically, in the brain?
Yeah, so we know everything has a genetic basis to it, because just like we inherit the color of our eyes, our type of hair from family members, guess what? Personality problems or disorders, traits are inherited as well.
I never thought of those. I always thought that traits were something we learned, like we were born more open and then we just learned through our parents. But that's interesting that genetically we are predisposed to have certain traits or certain extremes in certain traits.
Yeah.
So someone being more introvert or extrovert would be genetic, in a component of that.
Yeah, and so it varies. People that do the research on this, they look at how much is the genetic factor contributing to the variance that we see in personality, for example, and how many of these people end up getting a diagnosis, for example, of a certain type of personality disorder, and they measure all that good stuff, and there's pretty good information. The DSM-5 tells you exactly kind of what the latest thinking is on how much of the variance is coming from genetics.
And then also there are experiences that you see and this is what you told me and what I've learned when I was a hypnotherapist. They say that, when people have severe abuse, that could turn on some kind of, or trigger more of a disorder. How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, it's really good to understand what are called psychodynamic theories or models of the mind, because in essence, what we're talking about when we're talking about personality is the sense of self, in the sense of the ego, the I. So when there is a history of abuse, we know the sense of self is kind of challenged by its environment, because what we all need as human beings is nurturance, acceptance, love, all that good stuff.
And affection and all those things. So it could be just withdrawal, love. It doesn't have to be like harsh. A neglect would be kind of a way that would affect a person.
Neglect,
having touch.
Yeah, neglect is a big factor because especially early on, our system is designed to interact with the environment and shape itself around the needs of the environment.
So when the mother nurses a child, there's that kind of release of endorphins and those really wonderful chemicals that love and bonding, and if that's absent or if it's not consistent.
Right, but here we're looking at the sense of self. So beyond the neuropsych of it, right, the sense of self starts to form very early on, and it has a lot to do with am I accepted by the environment? Am I taken in, nurtured, taken care of? Are my needs met? And so we instinctually read what's going on with our mother, with the environment, with our family, and absorb all that into our sense of self, right? So let's say if everything goes right, you're confident. You feel like, yeah, I can go out into the world and face whatever challenges come my way. I might face difficulties, but I'll get through it.
Like you have kind of a self-efficacy around just dealing with life and people, and almost assuming that people will like you, because you're liked by your family and accepted. So you just have this assumption, and then that usually plays out. If so, you notice people that just know they're likable, that's what they experience. And then people that feel insecure, they have the opposite effect. They doubt themselves, and then they feel like no one likes them. And even if it's not showing, it appears to them externally that way.
Yeah, and certainly from our perspective, we don't see that as brokenness, because if your mind is protecting you, that's a sign of a healthy, strong mind, whatever happened to you. Even if you were neglected or somehow mistreated, if your mind said, I'm going to defend myself against that and be guarded and look out for relationships and people, that's a sign of a healthy, functioning mind, not a broken mind. Whereas in clinical psychiatric circles, those things would be considered some
like
kind
wounds
of some kind of problem, some kind of psychological, emotional problem, or what they call disorders of the self in some schools.
But we see it as a natural way the ego tries to balance out and protect this sense of self in a way.
Absolutely. It makes sense that if you cannot trust the world to take care of you or others around you to take care of you, then you have to look out for yourself, and you have to be weary of intimacy, which means allowing others into your psychological, emotional sphere.
And usually the people people that have that, I wasn't taken care of as a child, so I'm going to be hyper vigilant to connect with people. The people they mistrust the most aren't the actual mean people, because it's almost like, I know who they are. They don't trust the nicer people that are actually giving them love. They reject those people because it just doesn't fit into their narrative. And so it's sort of weird, right? You want to be, so if you ever had a friend that, might have been neglected, and you try to be nice to them, and it's almost like it's almost, would you say almost painful for them to allow that in, because it just doesn't fit their... Well,
it feels...
It's scary, right?
It feels scary, vulnerable to them, rightly so, right? If you go by their early experiences, they are correct, essentially, in their misinterpretation of the situation. The only problem, of course, is that it does limit their functionality as adults, because they're still living the same pattern from early childhood.
They're wearing the armor that they put on, which helped them survive in that early life experience. So they didn't really fall apart. They just
adapted.
So let's talk about the extreme of that. Like we're talking really about, we all get conditioned. We all have this, defenses. And so now let's talk about like when it really goes wrong, where it's kind of like we always talk about a spectrum. We all have a piece of every personality trait in us, but there's always a spectrum of intensity and then it goes to the level of disorder.
Yeah. So from the clinical perspective, they go by, let's say, a list of characteristics or symptoms, right? The behaviors exhibited by the person. And then if you have a certain amount of those characteristics, voila, you have the diagnosis. And
I remember when I first got the DSM, I always think it was the 4 when we were, it's like the 6 now or something? 5. It was. I was reading it, saying, I think I have these. Like I diagnosed myself with everything because we all have a little bit of those. If you read some of these, you're like, yeah, I could see how I can be that way or that way. But when it's a disorder, it's almost like it's predominant the way you act. How would you? Because if you read it, you think, well, yeah, I can be a little over emotional sometimes, or I could feel sensitive to criticism sometimes. How would you define like where's that edge?
Yeah. So. Let's say the bottom line is this, that the person that is diagnosed with a personality disorder, their typical way of responding to life becomes that fixed way, that they're always defensive. No, they're always kind of putting others down or angry at people that appear to be criticizing. Any of those traits, they're very fixated on that way of responding, and they don't have the flexibility to respond in other ways.
So it's that rigidity where you can't really have if you're a friend, I'm sure you've had friends like this or someone at work where you're trying to talk it out and they just can't, you can't reach them. There's no, that could be a sign that maybe there's something, because it's so rigid and there's no gray area. It's either all good or all bad.
Well, let's talk about a specific one because they're different kinds, and so
it presents differently.
Yeah, exactly. So narcissism or narcissistic personality disorder, it's a big one because it's thrown a lot around out in the internet and in different circles, and it's good that people are curious and want to know, well, what is this thing called narcissism and what's going on? How do I deal with it? So in that regard, it's good. Let's say the negative part is that there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of demonizing of people that are purported to have this personality disorder, and dehumanizing them.
Well, it's almost like if someone had like a physical disorder and they couldn't walk or they were handicapped, would you demonize those people? It's the same thing. It's just because when it's psychological, it almost, and it can be like the people who are physically challenged aren't as, aren't hurting other people, but then the people that can have the disorders can be disruptive to people. So it's almost like they're the bad people.
Exactly. And of course, to some extent, that's true. People with narcissistic tendencies or traits or disorders, they're going to mess up with your life. They're going to
destructive. Right?
Yeah, because let's look at this particular personality disorder or the way it's defined. So there's a pattern of grandiosity. The person feels like I am the universe's gift to humanity, right? And I'm here to bestow my gifts upon you, and everybody should understand that.
And bow, and there's nothing wrong with me. Everyone
right.
else is. If you have something wrong with me, there's something. If you see something wrong with me, it has to do with you.
That's right. So in regular social circles, of course, that's considered bad taste and
taboo almost.
Yeah, exactly. If somebody acts like that, people run away or
Who
judge
do they think
them.
They are?
But these people can be very charming at the same time because it's not impacting their intelligence. Often they're very intelligent, very capable people, And so people are charmed by this kind of self-assurance, and they think, well, here's somebody who's confident and knows what they're going for and knows what they want.
Don't you think people that are more insecure are drawn to those kind of people because it's almost like their shadow, they're the part that they don't, they kind of borrow that charm and that power in a way? That you're drawn to that because in partnerships, even romantic, we see this a lot with romantic partners. They fall for that person that just fills that gap they think they have in themselves.
Yes.
That if I ride the wave with this charming man, I like kind of it gives me the charm in a way.
Yeah, unfortunately, the other traits associated with personality disorder or narcissism are this lack of empathy.
Oh, yeah.
And so you have somebody who is very self-assured of their projects and their ideas, but disvalues and disempowers others around them, especially those that project to them the savior or this great personality.
The God complex.
Yeah, they're going to use other people around them and then spit them out, basically, discard them when they're no longer worshiping them or acknowledging their greatness. And they potentially could get hurt, of course, emotionally, financially, psychologically, in all those ways.
So if the person doesn't keep saying, you're great, you're great, you're great, that person pushes them away.
Very much so. Anybody that
and
threatens...
And makes them the enemy, even hurt, like instead of just walking away, don't they have like a vindictive?
They could, yes. Yeah, there's a lot of variety of the kind of the way it plays out.
They can have more than one.
Yeah, and there's also severity. Some people have a mild kind of traits around that narcissism, and others full-blown personality disorder. But psychologically, what's going on, and this is where the psychodynamic theories come in handy, psychologically what's going on is their sense of self is very weak, very fragile. And so they're projecting this big, huge persona as a facade, as a defense mechanism against the world. And so it's a defense mechanism, not it's not really their personality. You're seeing their defenses. Exactly. And so here it gets tricky as to why people would blame them and hold them accountable when you're talking about somebody who has psychological, emotional problems. But it appears, the opposite. It appears that, this person has it together and they're very confident and all this. But in reality, they're suffering internally from this fragile sense of self that continuously needs reinforcement, protection, self-assurance from others, validation from others.
And so then the problem with having a relationship with someone like that or being could be a boss. They were saying that 30% of CEOs have some level of narcissistic personality, not a disorder, but they have those kind of traits. Or they even said sociopathic, that was the research. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of like that lack of empathy, and they're just all about the money. And
that's another part of it, that it's part of human nature, essentially, because we know these people. I'm sure everyone has met somebody like this, but maybe didn't get involved with them or didn't really get close to them. But they're out there, and they might be doctors, lawyers, politicians,
coaches,
all kinds of people, exactly. And people are blindsided because they're going from the assumption that these look like normal people to me,
and charming, like person. You said. They first put on the charm, and you're drawn to their charisma and this kind of special kindness about them.
That's right.
We're all drawn to people that are confident. I think naturally we want to, when someone's confident, we tend to want to be around them because we feel kind of secure in a way around a confident person versus around someone who doubts. Because if you think about in the tribe, if you were on the brush and someone's freaking out, you don't want to be near the scared person. You want to be by the confident warrior or soldier that's going to make you feel safe. And so we tend to want to be around those type of people that are confident, but then we get fooled thinking, that confidence is just it's a facade. It's not really real confidence.
Yeah, that's a tragedy. Also, that psychology doesn't really have a good way to help these people.
There's no treatment for narcissism?
There are, but...
The narcissist wouldn't go for it because they don't think
That's right.
they need help.
Yes.
It's just everyone around them does.
So it's kind of a catch-22 because, the way they perceive themselves, it prevents them from saying, I need help. It's not in their vocabulary.
Well, it's kind of like, if you think about the emperor who has no clothes, that story, he was the only one who didn't know that he didn't have clothes on, and that's kind of the narcissist. He or she doesn't know that what she's doing. They're really kind of blind to their own. Anyone with a kind of a personality. So we're all, even our shadow, we're all blind to our own, how other people see us and perceive us.
Absolutely.
But even with the disorder, we don't have the ability to self-reflect, or we don't have that sense of insight that we can't, because we have that rigid personality that's highly, highly guarded, that we can't really, it's almost like we'd be fearful for that person to face the weak ego, because it would basically implode their ego. It would be like almost like death to them to do personal development work or anything like that, right?
Yeah, it's hard to say. Again, it would depend on the severity of the situation. But let's move to the spiritual element then.
Okay.
Because let's say so far we've been talking about the clinical aspects of it and the way psychology and even the internet look at these problems.
Do we want to talk about the other disorders, or not really? Just move on? Well, just kind of like there's also borderline, which is the kind of like black and white, the extreme of I love you and I hate you. And so they say 30% or 70% of women are more borderline and 30% narcissist. And then the flip is the narcissistic is typically 70% male and 30% women.
I think it's more like 80, but
80, yeah. So predominantly narcissism shows up in men, and then borderline is a little different. It's more very insecure. Like, I mean, it's still insecure, but what would you say that would, what that looks like?
Yeah,
like I see it as the extreme. I love you, and then I hate you. Like that kind of like black and white.
Yeah, it could play out like extreme, that. But again, we go back to that sense of self is fragile, right? And that sense of self is fragile, very much like the narcissist. They're related. These are narcissism or narcissistic personality disorder and borderline personality disorder are considered part of cluster B personalities. Cluster Bs, they kind of have to do with that difficulty managing emotions. And in the borderline, you definitely see that difficulty with managing emotions, especially any suggestion of rejection. So they're always hypersensitive to being rejected by others. But of course, that's what they end up doing by kind of being either very needy and needing the praise and approval of this person, or when they feel that this person has withdrawn their attention from me or their approval of me, then they demonize the person. They project all the bad onto them.
And it's like blindsided. Again, you feel blindsided because you like have a friend that you're just like, oh, I thought that person really liked me. And then you just say the wrong thing. And I've had worked with some people like that in the corporate job. Like all of a sudden, like they're just not my friend anymore. I'm like, did I say something wrong? And you don't know what's going to set them off, and they're not able to talk about it. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to.
Yeah, they have a lot of problems with interpersonal relationships. I mean, intimate, really close relationships are difficult for them because of these traits.
And then histrionic is, what would you say?
Yeah, histrionic is an interesting one. It's people that are overly dramatic, and they're often mistaken for borderline, but they don't have the kind of the sensitivity to rejection. but they're more dramatic in everything. Like everything is a big drama for them.
Like positive and negative, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, that was the best thing ever, but it's like over the top. All like very like almost like out of the realm of normal, would you say? Like out of like kind of an extreme, like we all have this sort of social graces that we have as human beings, and then there's this edges of normality. Is I guess that's what the typical, I would say, instead of normal. But
well, again, we all have these traits.
Yeah,
we all are a little bit narcissistic.
I could be a little like that.
We're all a little dramatic, sensitive to rejection, of course. Again, the only problem with people that are diagnosed with these disorders is that they've adopted these strategies, these defensive strategies, as the go-to way of dealing with everything. And so it becomes that pattern.
There's no, like, we don't just use it every once in a while. It's like every time this is the defense.
That's the way to go.
And so let's go into the spirituality of it all. I think, I always talk to people about that idea too, that if you looked at someone who was physically disabled or handicapped, you wouldn't say they're a terrible person. But when it's something mentally off with someone and it involves a relationship, it feels as though they're doing it intentionally, or they can be very harmful and hurtful and really bad. Like they could take your money, they could, ruin your reputation, break your heart, like all these things. So you tend to want to, or if it's a parent that's that way, oh man, having a parent with any kind of personality disorder. I mean, it's hard because you're supposed to take care of me and nurture me, and you're being so horrible. But I love that, we look at that as like, people that have these disorders, they can't help themselves. They didn't consciously say, I'm going to be a reckless person, or I don't care about other people, and I'm just going to. They're not choosing this disorder. It basically was an effect of their defense mechanisms that are created and genetically.
Exactly. In other words, if we could trade places with them, we would act the same way. We would essentially be playing out the same pattern of behavior. Anyone. So if you interchange your position with a person that's been diagnosed with having a personality disorder, you would essentially act out that personality disorder yourself. So that puts a different perspective on it now. The other fact is that it seems to be part of the human condition. I mean, we call it disorders, and we medicalize personality because it creates friction in social groups, right? Why is a person with narcissism or narcissistic personality disorder seen as having some kind of problem? Because it causes problems within the group. Right, they're going to betray the trust of other members of the group. So it goes back to this idea of we're medicalizing and defining personalities that are outside the norm of normality, based on what functions for society, for the group. Jung called this the persona. So what we're talking about when we're talking about personality disorders are really disorders of the persona. The persona that's created to interact out of a defense. That's right. Not who they really are on a deep level. Yes. On a spiritual level. That's right. So at a spiritual level, everyone is whole. Everybody is the higher self, the pure consciousness, as the Upanishads say, the infinite consciousness. The only thing is that their personality, the persona, their interface with others in social settings has become distorted somehow because of their past experiences and past conditioning. So there's let's say when we look at people demonizing these people.
Which happens a lot, yeah.
Yeah, and kind of pointing fingers and saying, they are the bad ones because of these psychological problems or personality problems that they have.
That idea of toxic people. You got to get the toxic people out of your life.
Yes. That's a very, let's say, a very limited way of seeing what's happening to these fellow human beings, right? First of all, we're dehumanizing them by thinking of them through the label instead of seeing them as a human being first, just like we do with anybody that has diabetes or autism or any other problem.
Like I have diabetes, so I'm a diabetic, and that's all I am.
That's right. We're being very judgmental, very narrow-minded in our approach to working with them. Now, understandably, we can see why people would tend to do that because, again, these people tend to hurt them or act outside the norm, the social group norms.
Can I ask you a question? Do you think it's also easy to label someone because it's like a defense mechanism as well for the person who's the victim of these kind of people, that they feel that it's not me, it's them kind of idea?
That's a big part of it too.
That I don't, I'm the innocent one, I didn't do anything wrong, and that person was bad, and that it helps them feel like, oh, it's not because I'm not lovable or I'm not kind or they're the ones who have the problem. Is that what would be more of a projection of that?
Yeah, Jung would say definitely projection is playing into that. Society wants to have these people to label as bad and the ones that are causing the problems in society, and that way they absolve themselves or the group absolves itself of responsibility and says, if we could only manage these people, or if these people would only get the right medication and the right treatment,
or just leave my life, get out of my life, right? Let's just get rid of these people that are like, shut them out. Right?
Yes. But again, at the deeper spiritual level, the question is, if you only like the people that like you,
or love you,
and you only love them back, that's not real spirituality. That's simply what everybody does.
That's easy to do.
Exactly.
It's easy to love the people that love you.
Yes. One of the possibilities is that these personalities, or what we call personality disorders, are in the mix so that we can practice real compassion. Because there is no other way to practice it. Because again, if you only like the people and are compassionate towards the people that are compassionate towards you, anybody can do that.
Well, you can have compassion for, a family member who you got into a fight with and they had a tough day, and you're like, oh, I can have compassion for her, she's having a tough time. But there's that underlying love there. So it's not that much of a stretch. That's but right. To have compassion for the cruel, and even like really cruel, like, psychopaths and murderers and all those people, it's not that you endorse what they do, but to understand that they can't help themselves. Not to, again, let them off the hook, but how do you have compassion? If you're a victim of a crime or something, what else is there left to do but have compassion for, because if the mind can create a beautiful spiritual being that's perfect and kind and loving, the opposite must also have to take place in Maya. There's dual, so the extreme of the most spiritual guru you've ever met shows up in the other end of the spectrum in the psyche.
Yeah.
So what they say, the tree reaches to heaven and then also reaches down to hell. So we're seeing all these parts of our psyche, our collective psyche, in a way. Yeah. We might personally be presenting with those personality traits, but deep within us, we're all connected.
Yeah. Jung would say, if you are seeing these traits in a fellow human being, what you want to do is ask yourself, what corresponds in me to those traits that I'm seeing in this other person?
Can I be a little bit of selfish? Can I be a little cold sometimes? Can I be a little braggy about my success? Can I be a little wanting the attention? Is that me wanting the attention? Yeah. I find that sometimes even looking at them they're extreme. It's probably easiest to see your shadow in those extreme cases because you get to see what you're really attached to for yourself, what your persona is attached to. So maybe you are triggered by the narcissist because you're really attached to being afraid of getting all the attention. You know, you're the opposite. And of course, it's every individual has a different trigger. And then also, like, what is it question about yourself? There's always something to work with. Now, it doesn't mean that you should not keep boundaries. It doesn't mean that you should just let the person be how they are because they're ill and they need help. What you want to do is you want to keep strong boundaries with these people. You want to establish strong boundaries, and then there's only so much you can do. You're not a professional, and hopefully they can find some way to get some help. But what you can do with it is be more spiritual and
but the spiritual level is a little bit different than social interaction, let's say, because at the spiritual level, you're seeing the connection between you and them. In other words, if you're really seeing them through spiritual eyes, there's no distinction. They are like part of you, you are a part of them.
Yeah.
And so then you're working with it at a very different level.
So more of a holistic level versus us versus them. I get it.
Yeah.
And so I love that what you just said about they really give us an opportunity to work with our compassion. And it's really easy to have compassion to people we care about, our friends and people we love. But to have compassion for someone who's a difficult person is, I guess, the highest form of spiritual evolution.
Yes, and then finally, you see that the whole culture is narcissistic.
Yes.
If you think about how we were raised and how we were trained to focus on accomplishment, on the external.
Show everyone how successful we are.
That's right. The bottom line is, how much money do you make? What kind of work do you do?
Are you married? How many kids do you have? Are your kids in advanced their classes? Are they getting their honor roll? And you see the bumper stickers. My child made the honor roll. It's like a little bit of that braggadociousness, which is okay. But the thing is to own it and say, you know what? I can be a little braggy sometimes. I can be a little self-centered. And sometimes you hurt people by saying the wrong thing and you're not thinking with the other person's, how they are going to feel when you say something. We all do that. And to be gentle with ourselves as well. Compassion with ourselves for our little picadillos that we do. And
the whole culture of Instagram.
Oh, yes.
It's essentially an ego building, persona building system. Now, there's nothing wrong with this because, again, the persona, the ego is a part of our natural psyche. We simply want to understand these things and their importance in the totality of who we are as human beings. If we don't understand that, then we give them this inordinate importance and we think and identify as persona ego.
And really, truly, the power that these narcissists and people that cause us difficulties, we give them so much power to make us unhappy, to we're projecting all our power onto these people. The best thing we can do is have compassion and retrieve our power, see how they're like us. That's really the way to reclaim our power. And not, you set boundaries and do all the practical things, but to truly own your power and not feel afraid or blindsided by a difficult person. Wow, how invincible can you be in the world? And whole and compassionate and more well-balanced. Instead of building up your other persona to not be like them and put those type of traits in your shadow.
Yeah, so ultimately, people that trigger us through their personalities in whatever capacity they may, are giving us an opportunity to go deeper into ourselves, to understand where is the source of compassion in me.
And every time I'm triggered, I have such love for the person who triggers me because I realize they're showing me a part of myself I couldn't see if they didn't show up. And the more extreme, the more, I say the bigger the payoff, because you really can get to another level of growth. And you can't really grow just by everyone agreeing with you and everyone telling you, you're doing a great job, and never triggering you. The triggering people are basically sacrificing their own self for you in a way to help you grow. And so we're all helping each other. And this world is full of triggers, and we if we use it and not be afraid of it, and understand that some people, I mean, all people, even if they don't have a disorder, we're all acting out of our own conditioning. We're not acting out of free will unless we're doing our shadow work and conscious and moving forward with our life. We have to have compassion for everyone. Yeah. Because everyone's just, working with stuff that, they all had to deal with in this life, and the defenses of the ego that they are not conscious of.
Everyone is facing a tremendous battle. I'm sorry, my voice is going.
Yeah, everyone is, the battle of being human and trying to find our way back home. Great. Well, thank you for joining us today. This was a very enlightening conversation. I'm sure we'll get lots of comments on this one. We'll see you next week when we talk about the fun topic of the spiritual personality, spiritual bypassing. A lot of people have been asking us to talk about that. So we'll talk about spiritual bypassing next week. Hopefully we'll see you then. Take care.
Thanks for watching.
Bye-bye.